Hi, everybody. Welcome to Friday night. Good to have you here with me. We had a lot of news that happened today, almost too much to pack into the show, so I'm going to dive right in. If you are counting, yes, we are getting close to like 8 years since those murders in Delphi, Indiana, where 2 teenage girls, 13 and 14, were savagely murdered. Took 5 years to find someone to arrest. Now, a couple of years later, he's on trial. And do you know that all this time? You probably do. We have not even been told how they were killed. So few of the details from the murder scene have been released. But today, in opening statements, the floodgates were opened, and you have to have a strong stomach. Big warning, huge warning off the top of this show. I'm going to get into some of these details. They're very, very, very uncomfortable, and they are sad. We're talking about 2 little girls and the conditions in which their bodies... It's awful stuff. It really is. But it's important. It's important to both the prosecution and the defense. I'm going to tell you why. Because the guy they have on trial confessed a lot in jail. So do those confessions match the details no one's ever heard? That's why it's important. That's going to come in a moment. Also, I like Pop-Tarts. I like chips. I like candy. I draw the line at juice boxes because I am not in 2nd grade anymore. But apparently that's what Sarah Boon insists that she deserves. In court, at defense table. I don't get it either. What murder defendant asks the judge, can I have snacks? This one. And should we be surprised since she burned through 9 attorneys? This guy on her left here, that's the 9th. I don't know how long he'll last if it's all the way through trial, but... So that's how things started with this murder trial. But how's it going now that it's really going? Because as it turns out, it's not the only demand that Ms. Boon has made of this judge. So wait till you hear what the judge had to say, and then wait till you hear what prosecutors had to say. That's coming up in a moment. And then do you remember little Charlotte Senna, 9 years old, kidnapped from a campground with her family? Happened about a year ago. The kidnapper kept her in his trailer for about 47 hours. But they rescued her. They got her. Cops got to her, mostly because of the sheer stupidity of the criminal. But the details of what happened and how she was grabbed off her bike, a lot of that stuff hasn't been made public. And of course, this little girl hasn't been made public. Her name, yes. Her mom is joining me tonight with some details you may never have heard, and a couple of things that we could not believe. Just unbelievable. I think there's a really good lesson in this for all of us. And thank God that there are these sunny days that little Charlotte can enjoy. I want to start here. Been more than 7.5 years since Abby Williams and her best friend Liberty German, they were known as Abby and Liberty, 13 and 14 respectively, violently murdered in Delphi, Indiana. Again, almost 8 years ago. And for more than these years, more than these 7.5 years, police have kept all these crime scene details so close to the vest. They wouldn't even say how they died. No cause of death. It's very odd. When photos were leaked from the defense attorney's office, the judge up and fired them. And not until the Indiana Supreme Court said so did those lawyers get back on the case. But now, finally, the man they arrested, right there, Richard Allen, he is on trial and the floodgates opened on those sordid details. Even so, that same judge is putting some really strict restrictions on the media and the public. Our national correspondent, Alex Capriello, was in court.
Hey, Ashleigh. It was a very busy day here in Delphi, Indiana. We heard opening statements from lawyers as well as powerfully emotional testimony from the family members of the victims, Libby German and Abby Williams. The unfortunate part about it all is that we can't actually show you anything that happened inside because cell phones, laptops, and even smartwatches are all strictly prohibited. Judge Fran Gold's been extremely strict about this ruling. She wants to make sure that the defendant, Richard Allen, has a fair and unbiased day in court each and every day. The judge judge means business. In fact, she even confiscated the cameras of several different news crews that were caught earlier this morning filming the shuttle that was actually taking the jury pool into this courthouse. That, as you know, is also strictly prohibited. Richard Allen seemed in good spirits this morning when the trial kicked off. He wasn't wearing his typical prison jumpsuit. Instead, he was wearing a nice button-down and khaki pants. He looked also to be in really good health, much better than what we've seen in the past from those photos from prison where he seemed disheveled and he looked as if he was in pain. He took good notes throughout the day, and he was listening intently to his lawyers make arguments about his innocence. The jury also paying very close attention. There are 16 of them. That includes 4 alternates. You could see them, in particular, perk up when exhibits were being shown, like maps of the bridge and the trail nearby where their bodies were found, and those search and rescue efforts worked tirelessly to find them. The only witnesses, the majority of the witnesses, I should say, were family members of Libby and Abby. They described the pain that they felt when they learned their loved ones were killed, their bodies discovered naked, their throats slashed. Libby's grandma wept as she testified about the last thing that her granddaughter said to her, quote, "Grandma, I'll be okay." The jury is here for the long run. They all come from Fort Wayne. That's about 2.5 hours northeast of Delphi. They're going to be sequestered for the next month or so while this trial goes on. They're working 6 days a week. The only day off that they have is Sunday, and their own electronics have also been taken from them. In fact, the only time they can actually speak and see their families is under the direct supervision of sheriff's deputies. 30 seats have been set aside for the family members of the victims and as well as the defendant. Another 12 goes to members of the media. That leaves 30 seats left for the general public, and there is already a long line for people who want to be here for this high-profile trial. In fact, people were lining up outside the courthouse as soon as 8 o'clock last night. We're going to continue monitoring this trial each and every day. We'll have the latest on NewsNation. Ashleigh.
Alex Capriello for us. The defendant, as Alex mentioned, is longtime Delphi pharmacy tech named Richard Allen. The state says he's the man that Libby captured on her phone on an abandoned railway bridge, the one who was ordering those girls down the hill.
Guys. Downhill. Guys. Downhill.
Libby's and Abby's bodies were found the next day, and not until this day have officials said how they died, how they were found. Libby, according to the prosecutors, was naked, and she was covered in blood. Her throat had been slit. Abby was not naked. She was wearing Libby's clothes, but her throat had also been slit. Abby's own clothes were in the creek nearby. Libby's phone and Libby's shoes were found under Abby's body. But the defense told jurors that Richard Allen is innocent, period. Actually, the term that his lawyer used was truly innocent. He said that police have botched this investigation since the beginning and that the evidence does not point to Allen. He added, and I quote, "When you find out what's on Libby's phone, this case is going to fall apart in front of your very eyes," end quote. And I want to stop here and bring in 2 people who know this story back to front. Andrew Iden co-hosts the podcast Deviant, and he did a deep dive into the Delphi case on that podcast. Susan Hendricks is a longtime TV journalist, colleague of mine, and the author of Down the Hill, My Descent into the Double Murder in Delphi. Susan was also in the courtroom today. It's great to have both of you, both my former colleagues. Thank you for doing this, you two. Drew, let me start with you, having been in this for so long, and all of us have been wondering, what are the details of the deaths? How did these girls die? And then today to hear everything. I'm not going to ask you if it was shocking. I know it was. It was shocking to everybody. But did it move a needle for you in any particular way when you heard these details?
You know, it's hard to say. I mean, and even though you're right, it is shocking. I think from the beginning that this case has really been, a profound look at understanding the facts here. And the details of these girls' deaths were horrific. As far as moving the needle either way, it's hard to say. It depends on the day, when somebody asks me about this case, which way I lean, who I think is kind of like, gonna come out on the other end of this thing. It's hard to say. So really, it hasn't moved the needle yet for me. And I think we all need to really keep that in mind as we, proceed through this trial and hear all these facts as they come out.
Susan, I think when I heard these details, all I could think of is the number of times that Richard Allen, according to prosecutors, has confessed in jail to guards, to his wife on the phone. I mean, dozens of times he has mentioned that he killed these girls. He's also said things like, I shot them. And we know now they were not shot. What I'm curious about is, do we know if he has said anything that aligns with the facts that were released today?
Yeah, absolutely. And going back to what Drew just said, I completely understand what he's saying, because this has been going on for 7+ years. And there's been so much speculation, Ashleigh, as you said, and so much secrecy. And with the confessions, and you're thinking, I was at a hearing at the end of July, the beginning of August. Of course, no cameras. There's been a lot of secrecy surrounding this. But I did hear about all of those confessions, alleged confessions. And you're thinking, okay, then that makes him guilty if he said it to his wife, to his mother. I mean, he's admitting it. But then they said, look, he shouldn't be in that prison. And then we hear today all of the horrific details, learning that Libby was naked, the way in which they died. And the prosecutor, Nick McClelland, it was surreal walking in there today thinking, oh my gosh, after 7 years, finally opening statements, here we are. And I felt bad for the prosecutor. He goes to use this huge kind of monitor and it didn't work. And we're waiting and waiting. It's like 15 minutes in. He goes, okay, moving on. I wanted to show you this. We're moving on. And he was able to say, this is exactly what happened. And at the very end, he said something powerful. He said, alluding to Richard Allen, kind of pointing in that direction and saying, the last face the girls saw before their throats were slashed was Richard Allen's, and walks off. And you think, oh my God. And I look at the family, and I looked over at Richard Allen's wife and mother. They were tearing up as well. So it is surreal overall to be in there and finally opening statements.
I can't imagine it, but you just hit on something that tweaked, Susan. Prosecutor couldn't get his electronics to work, couldn't get the big board to work. And Drew, isn't this really what the defense is saying is kind of indicative of the whole investigation? Aren't they saying that everything has been botched since day one? So there you are. They proved it for you right in the front of the courtroom.
Yeah, it's kind of a metaphor for a lot of things, right? And you're right. Baldwin and Rosie have been saying, look, this thing has been bungled from the beginning. And I can tell you in conversations that I've had with people, there are instances where there have been balls dropped. And, it's been outlined in motions that have come out previously of lost evidence, misplaced evidence, interviews that were either, at best lost, at worst deleted from hard drives. So, and numerous instances of it, allegedly, of the prosecution trying to almost cover their tracks in the process before that's found out. So you're right. Today, as Susan said, that kind of issue with the big board was a bit of a metaphor for a lot of the steps along the way for Nick McClelland and the prosecution this whole time.
So the other thing in the details today, and Susan, I'll get you to weigh in on this, because I don't know if the courtroom felt as confused as I did, but hearing that Abby was wearing Libby's clothes and that Libby was completely naked. Some of her clothes were in the river, but her shoes and her phone were underneath Abby's body. I was trying to think of every which way that could make sense in a theory of a killing. Are there some theories about why that would be? Why would it be that Abby was wearing Libby's clothes?
Yeah, there are. Going back to the hearing, it felt like a mini trial. And as you know, Ashleigh, it was at the end of July, the beginning of August. And Cicero was on the stand. He's a blood expert. And he really took us through. He was the last witness on the stand. And he takes you through, based on the blood splatter near the girls' bodies, saying about Libby and her neck and what he was alluding to based on his expertise about how she sat up at one point, grabbed her neck. She had blood on her thigh. And apparently he was saying the blood on the tree is from her hand. And I'm sitting next to her grandmother, who slowly touches her neck as I'm looking over. And you're thinking the last moments. And what he also determined, this expert, and as you know, it can be the battle of the experts, but what this expert said was that Abby was dressed herself, or was forced to dress in Libby's clothes before she was healed, based on the blood going through the clothes and through the ground, not much in the general area. But that kind of, to me, I was listening intently. He was on the stand about 45 minutes, and there wasn't a sound in the courtroom to say, oh my gosh, was this their final moments? And he did say this, It's something called undoing. I'd never heard of. Was he feeling, whoever did it, was he feeling kind of sad that for Abby, for whatever reason? Because on the alleged confessions, one of them, another witness was on the stand and said he was sorry for killing Abby, not Libby. So she was dressed, Libby was not. So I'm wondering if all this will make sense. And again, opening statements today, we got a long way to go. Could be a month. So hopefully the blanks are filled in here on what we don't know.
Still a lot. And Drew, to that end, obviously everybody has been wondering about sex assault, knowing that the girls, or at least one of the girls, was naked. It feels like a foregone conclusion, but have they touched on real evidence to that yet?
It doesn't appear so, but to kind of echo what Susan's saying, we're here in the first day, right? This is sort of, the opening arguments here are kind of like we're all news people, right? This is the headline, right? So what we have to do is we have to wait for the second, third, fourth graph of this article, right? So today's the headline, and as we proceed, that's where that stuff's going to come out. At this point, it's hard to say. But that's why these opening statements are so important and move everybody, is because you're getting that first headline, and then assuming that as they move forward, they're going to give you the rest of the story.
Well, I'm in. I mean, I want to hear every moment of this now. So I'm going to ask both of you back. Susan Hendricks, Andrew Iden, I loved working with you then, and I love working with you tonight. And I hope you'll come back, both of you. Thank you.
Sure thing. Absolutely.
Thanks.
And I miss you both, too. All right, coming up next. A mother who taught her kids how not to get kidnapped, and a 9-year-old daughter who listened and was kidnapped anyway. The case made headlines across the country last year. Little Charlotte Senna, snatched from a campground and held captive 2 days before being rescued. Charlotte's mom joins me next with never-before-heard details of what happened. Maybe, not always, but certainly now, most kids know about stranger danger. They've at least heard the phrase, that's for sure. But Tricia Senna didn't stop there. She taught her kids exactly what to say and what to do, and more importantly, what not to do to avoid stranger danger. She told them to pair up when they are out of her sight and to just say no if an unknown grown-up asks them for help because, quote, grown-ups don't ask kids for help. Tricia would tell her kids, the grown-ups ask other grown-ups to help, not kids. But almost a year ago at a campground in upstate New York, a stranger did approach her 9-year-old daughter, Charlotte. And we know now that stranger did lure little Charlotte by asking for help. As she was riding her bike on the campground loop, he stopped his truck beside Charlotte and asked her to help him get something out of the back of his truck. And Charlotte, remembering what her mom had told her, said no. But the man persisted, explaining that his hands were too big to reach in that little space in the back. That persistence paid off. Charlotte finally agreed, and that man, Craig Nelson Ross Jr., pounced. He shoved Charlotte into the truck and he sped off, right past the Senna family's campsite. Ross held Charlotte captive in his ramshackle trailer for the next 47 hours. During this time, he left a ransom note at the family's home, and on that note were his fingerprints. Police descended on his camper a few miles away, and they found Charlotte alive, stashed away inside a cabinet. She was no longer wearing the same clothes that she'd been seen in when she vanished. In April, as part of a plea deal, Craig Nelson Ross Jr. was sentenced to 47 years in prison for kidnapping and sexual assault. That is 1 year for every single hour that little Charlotte was missing. And I'm happy to be joined now by Charlotte's mom, Tricia Senna. Tricia, thank you so much for being on. I just can't imagine what you have gone through as a mother myself. First and foremost, how is Charlotte doing?
She's doing good, for the most part. She has good days and she has bad days, just like everybody else. But I do think she puts a lot of effort into having good days. So
yeah,
that should be recognized.
Do you know what to do? I mean, it's so complicated. There's no playbook for mothering, let alone dealing with this, right?
Yeah.
Do you know what to do in terms of what to talk about, what not to talk about, and at the pace, what pace you let her tell her story?
It's really up to Charlotte. It's 100% up to Charlotte. There are things that I don't know, and maybe I'll never know. But I have been very adamant about giving Charlotte the choice to tell her story when she is ready, because I do feel a lot of her choices were taken away from her. And this is one thing that I can give back to her, if you will, is letting her take her time and tell her story when she is ready to tell me. So there are many details I don't know. And right now that's okay with me because she's not ready for me to know.
Yeah, that's a lot of wisdom for a mom because, of course, I'm sure you want everything. You want every single bit of it so you can beat it up and get rid of it or do whatever it is that we're supposed to do
Take
to
it
feel
from
better
her.
about this kind of a thing. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. What I did find amazing is just this recent detail that we hadn't heard before, and that was what exactly happened the moment Charlotte had that first encounter with this monster. Can you take me from there?
So this is a little bit of what Charlotte has told me. And as everybody knows, she was riding her bike and he had pulled, I don't want to say he pulled up next to her or she was there, because to be honest with you, until Charlotte tells me that part of the story, I am not 100% sure, but I do know that he saw her, and my interpretation is that he was waiting and he had asked Charlotte, can you help me get something out of the back of my car? And just like we had always told her, and I still tell my children, I encourage everybody to tell their children, adults don't ask children for help, and adults don't keep secrets with children. So these are, those are two things that we've talked about a lot. And she did tell him no. She did say, no, I think you can get it yourself. And he took advantage of her kindness and persisted and said, just how you had mentioned, his hands are too big and he couldn't get it. So she had said, okay, I'll help you. And that is when he pushed her in the back of his vehicle. So, it's difficult because you want to teach your children to be safe, but you also want to teach them to be kind and decent human beings. So, it was this situation where she knew, you shouldn't be asking me for help, but then saying, oh, maybe he really does need help and she wants to be helpful. So he's the worst kind of monster to prey on a child's kindness. And that's exactly what he did.
Honestly, Tricia, we had heard these lessons when we had our children when they were small. And we tried to come up with every scenario. Oftentimes we were taught predators like this will say, I have puppies, or I've lost my dog, or I've lost my cat, or I have candy, or I'm a friend of your parents. Did he use any of that kind of language with her?
Not to my knowledge. No, it was, it per Charlotte, it was, there's something under my seat that I cannot get. And she said, I think you can do it yourself, or something to that effect. And then he had said, my hands are too big. So we could, as parents, rack our brains about every scenario that we want to keep our children safe from. And it's just so overwhelming, the world we live in sometimes. It's just, we can never cover all that ground. Yeah. So it's just, you constantly have to talk to your kids about being safe, about being kind, and, not talking to strangers, but also helping people in need. It's this really wild balancing act. And to be honest, it's a lot of pressure on a kid to think, be kind, but be safe. And So we just have to all keep doing the best that we can and educating our children,
and to do it in real time, right? We forget that kids are in the moment, and in the moment is hard for adults. Ask any rape victim who says, I didn't know what to do. I froze. I mean, it is in the moment is 100% different. And then you're asking a little girl, to sort through all of the information she's had in her life and apply it to a real life circumstance. Tricia, I'm so sorry for what you and your family have gone to. Please give Charlotte a big hug and a kiss for us, and stay in touch with us and let us know how things are going. I've not lost thought of you for the last year, and I love this picture because she just looks very peaceful and happy, even though we can't see her face.
She's looking at a bright future.
Oh, I love that you said that. Tricia, Senna, thanks for being on.
Thank you for having me.
Still to come after the break, I get it. Some people stress eat, and a murder trial is just about as stressful as things can get. But Pop-Tarts and cookies, peppermints and juice packs, this is what Sarah Boon thinks that she deserves in court while fighting the murder case against her. So, what do you suppose the judge had to say? You'll hear it next. When Metallica toured the world in 2004, they demanded bacon at every meal. In the 80s, Van Halen famously insisted on M&Ms, minus the brown ones. They had to be removed. J-Lo had to have everything white on the road, from the couches to the drapes to the candles. And who can forget Cher needing an entire room just for her wigs when she toured in 1999? I am getting to the true crime part here, trust me. Today, a murder defendant in Florida apparently needs a reminder that the people I just talked about are rock stars. And I'm sorry to break it to you, Sarah Boon, you are not a rock star. Sarah's claim to fame, or rather infamy, according to the prosecutors, is that she killed her boyfriend 4.5 years ago by suffocating him slowly inside a suitcase. So it will come as no big surprise that the judge rejected her motion for professional hair and makeup at her trial. And he's also shot down her latest request, snacks, in the courtroom. Lots of them. Specifically Pop-Tarts, candy, potato chips, must be sour cream and onion, juice packs, peppermints, and cookies. To be fair, Sarah Boon is known to have a sweet tooth. Just watch how many times she asked for a Dr. Pepper while being questioned by the police the morning after George Torres died.
I really need something to drink. Okay, well, I got my Dr. Pepper on the counter. Okay, we'll take care of you. Give me 1 second. Okay. Please, may I have my Dr. Pepper? I am so cotton mouth right now. May I have my Dr. Pepper? It's on the counter. I can't move anything from out of the house.
We heard you. It's on the counter. Now that all of that is out of the way, let's talk about opening statements today and how things are looking for Sarah already. As expected, that haunting video of George slowly dying in the suitcase was heavily featured in the prosecutor's case. It was shot by Boon herself, George Torres gasping for air in the suitcase, begging for her to let him out. Boon's attorney, her ninth one, you should know the other 8 were either fired or quit, has a strategy, and it is to emphasize the abuse that he says Torres allegedly inflicted on Boon for years. He says that the suitcase merely, quote, gave Boon a captive audience while she got a few things off her chest. He also promised that Boon would take the stand in her own defense, and I cannot put into words how much I hope to hell that happens. I want to bring in Mark Eiglar. She's a former prosecutor, now criminal defense attorney in Florida. Is this the legal word for a case, a stinker?
Oh, yeah. This woman is completely delusional. I actually think her chances are better at getting the judge to give her the Nutter Butters and the makeovers that she wants before a jury ever acquits her and says this was, not criminal conduct like she's trying to suggest.
So let me ask you this. Look, she's had 9 lawyers, right? This guy didn't have a lot of time to work with her, only like a couple months. Why go for a defense of self-defense? Why not say, I was drunk, it was an accident, it can happen to anybody, we were being stupid and I passed out?
Because she's out of touch with reality. That's why her lawyers probably quit on her. I would quit on her. I'd say you're not allowing me to help you. The fact that he was allegedly abusive has no bearing on this case. Even if he was the absolute worst, if he was Ike Turner in terms of abuse, you don't get to put someone in a suitcase and allow them to tragically die.
So what is this business about putting her on the stand? She might be the most unlikable person I've ever come across in this business. And that's just from not meeting her, just from all the pretrial filings. But on the stand?
Do you know that in about 99.5% of my criminal cases in 32 years, I keep my clients off the stand? Because even the ones that are likable, you don't know what's going to happen. With her, she will be crucified. She's testifying because she has to. No one else is going to be able to support this alleged self-defense argument. And she will be crucified by the prosecution. They're going to say, didn't you tell 911 and the responding officer that you were playing a game of hide and seek? Isn't that what happened? And then you fell asleep because you were blitzed, you were drunk out of your mind? Oh, yeah, but that doesn't work for me getting acquitted. So essentially I need to tell a different story.
Yeah, it's hard to tell a different story when that first story will appear in the courtroom as well. So I can imagine jurors being pretty angry at hearing that two different versions. But, you know, let me ask you this. I could not understand where it came from, the list of snacks. I thought it was like The Onion reporting some fun story about this trial because she's had so many crazy developments with all the lawyers. But truly, that was the list that Sarah Boon literally put into the court records. I want Pop-Tarts and candy and Oreos, and I want sour cream and onion chips and peppermints and juice boxes.
I checked.
I don't even know what the question is. Honestly, Mark, I don't know what the question is. Have you ever heard anything like this?
I'll give it to you. Here's the question, and then here's the answer. The answer is I reread the Constitution. And nowhere is due process defined as giving her the snacks, the Pop-Tarts that she's requesting. She is not in touch with reality, and neither is her defense.
Yeah, I mean, maybe she would have been better representing herself, and she'd have an appeal of ineffective assistance of counsel. Otherwise, I don't know where they're going to...
No, representing herself, absolutely not. I could tell you, though, I am seriously offended because there are domestic violence victims out there who do react in the moment, but she apparently either watched the Menendez video or heard about it, and now she's thinking that's the defense du jour, and she wants to borrow that. And she is no victim that had to defend herself from imminent death or great bodily harm. This was someone who was just blitzed, drunk out of her mind, and screwed up and didn't let him out when he was begging for his life.
Mark Eiglarsh, I am calling you back as this trial continues. Thank you for this. Have a good weekend.
My pleasure. You too.
Coming up next, at risk of dating myself, and speaking of dating, do you remember this?
From Hollywood, the dating capital of the world, in color, it's The Dating Game. And here's the star of our show, and your host, Jim Lai.
Hey, in color. That was a big old deal. Did you know that an actual serial killer was once a contestant on this game show? Rodney Alcala murdered at least 5 women and girls in the late 1970s, but he took a break to go on national TV. If you think that's shocking, he actually won a date with the Bachelorette. How do you think that turned out? Up next, we'll take you on set and deep into the Netflix treatment of this eligible bachelor's killing spree. Watching old game shows on YouTube is one thing, but watching them over the air when back in the day you had only 4 or 5 channels to choose from, shows like Match Game and The Gong Show and the Newlywed Game, they were not to be missed. And every single guilty pleasure on TV today, I think, owes something to the dating game. Here's how it worked. A young and pretty bachelorette would ask questions of 3 hunky, eligible bachelors who were seated on the other side of a divider. At the end, based on the questions only, she would pick one of them for a dream date. And that might mean tennis lessons or dinner for 2 at the Brown Derby. It was racy and it was cheesy and everybody had big hair and leisure suits and I loved it. But one bachelor who made it onto the show in 1978 was unlike all the others. He was a serial killer named Rodney Alcala. And by the time he voluntarily appeared on this national television show, he had raped and brutally murdered at least 3 women, and he would go on to murder many more. A Netflix movie that just started streaming today tells the story.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome the woman of the hour. Let the games begin.
Bachelor number 1. This is nice and easy. What are girls for?
What do you mean?
Just what I said. I believe in you, Bachelor number 1.
Let's go.
When I look in your eyes, I go crazy. Bachelor number 2. What are girls for?
Why does this feel like a trap?
That old feeling inside.
I've been on this show since 1968. The one thing I've learned is, no matter what words they use, the question beneath the question remains the same.
What's the question?
Which one of you will hurt me?
And Bachelor number 3, I'm counting on you. What are girls for?
That was Anna Kendrick. She's the star of the movie, and she also directs it. But the star of this show on many nights is Katherine Ramsland, a professor of forensic psychology and author of a stack of books on serial and spree killers, and she's live again tonight. He gives me the willies even when he's dramatized on TV. You, Dr. Ramsland, studied this person. You studied him up and down. How did somebody who'd murdered thrice, raped an 8-year-old little girl, get on national television, especially a show like The Dating Game?
He had a great presentation. He had a good smile. In fact, he's better looking than they show in this particular movie. But they wanted guys who were tall and engaging, and they didn't do a background check by any means. So he came across well. He was confident, and he did have a high IQ. So I think they just thought he was perfect.
You know, we said every guilty pleasure on TV today owes something to The Dating Game, and I think background checks, too. Everybody's background checked, maybe as a result of this to start with. I want to play a clip of the actual 1978 Dating Game, because as you mentioned, he is very debonair. You can see how he would have been chosen. This is the show where he actually won. He won the round. He won the date with a bachelorette named Cheryl Bradshaw. Let's roll it.
You might find him skydiving or motorcycling. Please welcome Rodney Alcala. Rod, welcome. Number 1, would you say hello to Cheryl, please?
We're going to have a great time together, Cheryl.
Okay.
Bachelor number 1.
Yes?
What's your best time?
The best time is at night, nighttime.
Why do you say that?
Because that's the only time there is.
The only time? What's wrong with morning, afternoon?
Well, they're okay, but nighttime's when it really gets good.
I can see the cheese and all the rest, but there was more to it, Catherine. That bachelorette won the date. Did she go on it?
She did not go on it. She thought he was creepy. Right away, he put his arm around her. He'd give her a little kiss. She thought he was inappropriate and creepy, and she asked if it was all right if she did not go on the date.
It's interesting. I read something that she had said to the producers, he is strange and he has weird vibes. These were her words, strange with weird vibes.
Yeah, and I think he even had those weird vibes there, but he kept giving answers that the audience loved and laughed at. But even when you watch him on the show, there's something off about him. Those answers were dumb, actually, but audiences loved him.
Yeah. What happened to him?
He ended up dying in prison. He did get 2 death sentences, which were overturned, and he ended up dying at kind of an old age in prison in 2021.
And it looks like he did not age well based on what we're seeing on the screen. Dr. Ramsland, thank you. I love the work that you do. I'm so glad you do it because I can't imagine steeping myself in that in those vibes. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up next, the bombshell at the center of the Cash App murder trial. There she is. And she dropped a bombshell of her own. The glamorous sister of the man on trial apparently had not heard that this is not a whodunit and insisted instead her brother did not stab anyone. It is the same brother prosecutors say killed to avenge his sister's honor. So how did that honor stand up in court? Oh, wait till you hear. It's been like a really big week for murder trials. Besides the Delphi case in Indiana and then the suitcase murder in Florida, the so-called Cash App trial in San Francisco is going full throttle. And for a while this week, the woman at the center of the case was center stage in the courtroom. You can't miss her. I mean, look, it's like Hollywood. Khazar Momeni is the oh-so-glamorous sister, the little sister of Nima Momeni, who fatally stabbed a tech entrepreneur named Bob Lee last year. Bob Lee founded Cash App. The two men were allegedly fighting about Khazar's honor when Nima, big brother Nima, according to the state, pulled a knife. The defense says Bob pulled the knife and Nima acted in self-defense. Either way, everybody admits that Nima did the stabbing, everybody except his glamorous little sister. Yesterday, under oath, that sister testified and said, and I quote, "My brother was not the one that killed Bob." Cue the gasps in the courtroom. She also testified that her memory of the days surrounding Bob Lee's death are, quote, hazy. And that's because she'd done so much nitrous oxide and cocaine and LSD and GHB. Remember that whole honor thing? Apparently her big brother was trying to avenge her honor. So much for the honor part of it all. We're going to keep an eye on this one for you, but that's it for us tonight. Have yourself a great weekend, and I'll see you right back here on Monday. Meantime, Cuomo's next.
Hey, everybody, I'm Chris Cuomo. Thank you for joining me here on News Nation. Happy Friday night. We are now less than 3 weeks from Election Day. Trump and Harris are basically tied, okay? Now, here's my food for thought on the state of the race. The polls. All of the respected polls have it really close, in the overall and in the states that matter. We really haven't seen a race this close, according to those measurements, in a long time, like 20 years. But I'm not as caught up in how close it is. I'm very caught up, and I really want to talk to you about why. Polling lost some of my confidence, okay? The Vegas